The queen gave a little jiggle of excitement. "Oh, I can't wait for the torture. It is going to be so exquisite." She spread her arms wide. "Hear me, citizens of Nardis City. As our uninvited guests have chosen to not give us the pleasure of seeing them battle each other to the death, we will instead let them cook as slowly as possible by the fire of the Nagasas. We will take a short intermission in the festivities to allow all of you to place your bets. The roasting shall begin within 15 minutes, so don't be late," she added gleefully. Most of the Nartesians in the stands stood up and began milling about like a bunch of excited ants, and chattering like monkeys to find others to place wagers with. Hannah and I walked back toward each other, dragging our ankle chains behind us. We met next to Denarts, who was positioned between us. I gave him a respectful nod of my head. "Thank you for not fighting us. It was something I dreaded, and I feel foolish for not realizing there would be another way, as you have suggested." Denarts ruffled his wings a bit. "I don't believe my suggestion will be doing us any favors. The Queen seems very determined to win wagers by seeing us perish, one way or the other. But at least we die on our terms, not theirs, as friends, not enemies," I said, resolutely. "Or maybe we will not die at all," Hannah said wishfully. I looked at her with my head cocked a bit with curiosity and waited for her to elaborate. "We must not forget who we are, Lazarus," she chided gently. "We have been called to a great mission. Source would not have sent us to a place where we would perish before our destiny has even begun. The fire of the Nagasas will not hurt us. Our protective skins will protect us. We may even be able to shield Denarts somewhat." I was proud of my wife for her bravery and optimism, even though I knew the latter was founded in the naivete of someone who hasn't faced many situations of death from a determined adversary. "Our shield skins may protect us for a short time," I acknowledged. "The Nartesians are probably counting on that and factoring it into their wagering. I do not mean to throw cold water on your idea, but we need to be realistic. Even if our skins protected us from the fire of a Nagasa, would it protect us from the fire of 2 Nagasas, or 3? And even if the skins did protect our bodies, we still need to breathe. Our lungs will not survive breathing in superheated air any more than they would survive breathing in water, causing us to drown. And realistically, we are too small in size to be effective shields for Denarts, and his feathers will go up in flames as quickly as dry kindling wood the very moment the first fire touches them." Denarts cocked his head and stared intently at Hannah. "Is your companion always so optimistic?" he asked sarcastically. Hannah suppressed a little laugh with a tight-lipped smile. "Usually he's not so bad." I had to smile, realizing that despite the gravity of our situation, they were lightening the mood, even if it was at my expense. "In any case, I was not done with my suggestions," Hannah added impishly. I bowed a bit and swept my arm dramatically across my body. "By all means, my love, please continue." "We can pray," Hannah said with simple sincerity. "Perhaps the Source do not know our true situation." I held up my hands in a bit of frustration. I did so in great earnestness as we flew here from the mountain of Lassun's cave. "Sadly, we have already tried praying, Hannah, multiple times. Nothing has come of it. For whatever reason, the source do not answer and we are on our own. They do not answer or come to your aid because they do not exist, Denarts interjected. May we please stick to considering tactics that involve reality. You err in ignorance, my friend, I said cautiously, not wanting to stir up his ire. I assure you my sister is real and can do things the like of which none of us can imagine. And in truth, I died from the bite of a deadly poisonous serpent. My body laid in the grave 5 days and was resurrected back to life by Jesus, the Lord of Light. This was not something I dreamed or imagined. As Hannah can verify, this actually happened to me. And while my body slept in the grave, my spirit rose to a place of peace and wonder. The source are real. Of that I am most certain. My testimony had no effect on Denarts. He shook his enormous head dismissively. If it makes you feel more confident and less pessimistic in our situation, please implore your mythical gods as you wish, but do not involve me with such nonsense. And so we did. People were already sitting down again in the arena. Hannah and I only had time for a quick prayer as we held hands and faced each other under the watchful presence of Denarts looming above us. Praying for both of us, I implored, Source, thank you for giving us this exceptional opportunity to see new worlds and grow and expand from our experiences, but it seems those experiences are about to be permanently cut short unless you would be kind enough to intervene. If there is a way we can escape our predicament by the power of our own thoughts, strength, and celestial gifts, let it be so. But if there is more here than we can bear on our own. I never got to finish my prayer. A large fearsome Nagaza suddenly alighted right in front of us, perching on the rim of the lower arena wall. 2 others came down on either side and also stood on the wall. And of course, a 4th one landed on the edge of the wall behind us. The first Nagaza lifted up its head in surprise, then scooted off to the side a bit, clearing the view for Liaza to be looking right at us from her box seat. I suppose she must have just telepathically told the Nagaza to move away from her line of sight. The Queen addressed us personally in a most pompous, condescending tone of voice. Lazarus and Hannah, do not dwell upon your inevitable destruction. Please remember the good times you have had visiting us and the kind hospitality and pleasures we showed you before your traitorous hidden agendas were revealed. In consideration for the good times, please think about the happiness you will give to all of the spectators and the profits to those who place the best bets. We are all counting on your strength and fortitude. Please try to last as long as possible before expiring. Despite myself and our predicament, I had to chuckle. That was the most ridiculous, self-serving, audacious speech I had ever heard. I looked at Hannah and Denarts. What is our plan? Hannah just looked at me blankly. She was a very intelligent, talented woman, but battle strategy was not her forte. I looked up at Denarts. What say you? I say I am stumped, he replied stoically. If we were free of these chains we could take a fight to the flying worms that they would never forget. But immobilized by chains and attacked by streams of flames from adversaries beyond our reach, I do not see anything we can do offensively or defensively. I think we will just have to improvise after we see how they attack us. I hefted the long pike I had been given as a weapon. Denarts knew immediately what I was thinking. It will not work. The Nagasa's armor would not be pierced by that puny weapon. I could strangle them if I could get my talons around their neck. But even then, my talons would not pierce their armor, and I'm not sure I could actually succeed in killing one by strangulation. We cannot just do nothing. Hannah exclaimed in frustration. That is exactly what you will do. We heard the Queen's irritatingly shrill voice proclaim. I thought about letting you have some type of defense so we could be entertained by a battle, but that would be letting you die too noble of a death, fighting for your lives. And we can see much more interesting conflicts to the death among the Nagasa. No, you are worthless. A clod of dirt is more valuable. This will not be a fight for your survival. You will not survive. I don't wish to hurt your feelings, but the truth is this is an execution. It will just be a nice slow one for entertainment and profiting purposes. I'm sure you understand, don't you? I took in a big breath of air to shout an angry reply, but the Queen continued speaking aloud, far louder than a voice should be able to speak, cutting off my words. The man and the woman will die first, but very, very slowly and painfully. The bird will be spared until the end. His feathers will catch on fire so easily that we will be unable to prolong his death once he is ignited. So he will just have to watch the other two suffer while he contemplates his own looming demise. Liaza clapped her hands together loudly above her head. Let the roasting begin. Several more riderless Nagasas dropped down from the sky and settled onto the parapet wall until we were completely surrounded by Nagasas packed shoulder to shoulder around the perimeter wall. The only gap was a space left for the Queen's box so she would have an unimpeded view of our destruction. A net was once again dropped on top of Dinart's. A half-dozen men, each one far larger and more muscular than me, came out into the arena. They roughly grabbed me and Hannah, and despite both of our vigorous attempts to prevent them, they tied us back to back with a thick post between us in a way that we were perpendicular to the Queen and she could easily see both of us. The Nartesians departed back through the hidden door through which they had entered, and the Queen stood up at the edge of the parapet. Roast! She screamed. But cook them very slowly, she added in a perfectly sane voice. The louder they scream, the greater will be your reward. The faster they die, the longer will be your punishment. Now roast! Chapter 18. Unbearable. At the Queen's command, all the Nagasas that were perched on the arena parapet in a 180-degree arc, started shooting their hot flames at us. Those behind us refrained and held their fire, obeying the Queen's command to not torch Dinart's, who was standing behind us, until the end because he would burn too quickly. Initially the heat of the flames was not too bad. Our protective skins prevented our real skin from burning, and the air wasn't so hot that our lungs were hurt breathing it. If this is all it was going to be, a small part of me entertained the notion that we just might survive. But the Queen had other ideas. As we didn't appear to be uncomfortably warm, she commanded the Nagasas to jump down to the arena floor so they would be closer to us, and to alternate their fire breaths so that only every third Nagasa was breathing fire at any time. This ensured that there would always be fairly constant streams of fire as one Nagasa expelled his breath of fire and another began as the first ended and needed to catch his breath to rekindle the fire. However, even with that technique it wasn't long before all of the Nagasas had depleted their fire and could blow no more. Rather than give us a respite, Liaza ordered the diminished Nagasas to depart from the arena and commanded fresh, new replacements that had been flying in the sky above to come down and take their place. All too soon we were once again enduring the roasting fires of the Nagasas. Only now they were closer and fresher and the fire was certainly hotter. Because the Nagasas were closer, their fire coming from multiple directions at once enveloped us more completely. The air quickly became super heated and breathing soon became difficult. Hannah was gasping and obviously having even more trouble than me, and I was struggling for every breath. My instinct to breath in life-sustaining air was offset by the pain I knew was coming as my lungs burned with every intake. "Use your celestial gifts!" I yelled out to Hannah in my mind. I dared not do it vocally, as my open mouth would have allowed in even more superheated, lung-shriveling air. Hannah shook her head in frustration, looking at the ground, and cried out to me telepathically. "I cannot. I do not know how." "Just think what you want to happen," I counseled. "Start with some kind of bubble over us to protect us from the fire and heated air." "I am trying, Lazarus," she called out forlornly in her mind while desperately trying to stifle her sobs to limit her breathing. "Nothing is happening." I hung my own head in total frustration. For all three of us to be unable to do anything at all to help ourselves made me just want to scream out in anger and frustration. Even in that, I was maddeningly stymied as I couldn't risk breathing in any more of the heated air than necessary. Seeing us begin to falter, the Nartesians in the stand were going riotously crazy in their enthusiasm for our demise. They were screaming and shaking their fists, some imploring us to hold out longer and others to just give up and die. I assume each was calling for the desired outcome that would win them their wagers. I don't know if it was due to the heat or just incompetent tying of our bonds, but our chains loosened enough that Hannah and I were able to wiggle closer to each other. Despite the peril of our situation, I felt a small comfort in my heart when I was able to reach out and hold her hand. It seemed like such an insignificant thing, but up until that moment I had never felt such overpowering love for Hannah as when we shared our fate, hand in hand, before the deathly flames of the Nagasas in the arena of Nardis City, on a world unknown. Without warning or command from Liaza, a Nagasa suddenly descended upon us from above. My first thought was if it started breathing fire upon our heads we were surely doomed. But to our joyous relief, this Nagasa was not an enemy, but as true a friend as any I have ever known. It was Lasun. She landed behind us, stretched her translucent wings out wide, then brought them together and overlapping, wrapping us in a fire-protective cocoon. Her traitorous act of shielding us incensed Liaza almost beyond comprehension. She began yelling and screaming commands at the other Nagasas. Although I couldn't see her through Lasun's wings and the streams of fire being blasted at us, I winced at her shrill voice and was certain she was so worked up she must be foaming at the mouth like a rabid dog. 4 Nagasas with riders descended from above and hovered just over our heads. Lasun shot short blasts of fire at each of them, trying to keep them at bay, while conserving her fires so she could continue to fight. But her gallant effort to aid us was soon for naught. The warriors riding the Nagasas each held a large tube-like weapon. Simultaneously they all used the weapon to shoot snaking lines of chains at Lassoon. All four wrapped tightly in several loops around her neck. The other Nagasas then lifted skyward and Lassoon was pulled up underneath them, dangling by the noose of chains encircling her neck. Lassoon flapped her elegant long wings fruitlessly. There was no escape from her strangling bonds. For a moment we had a respite from our burning. The Nagasas scorching us stopped to witness the scene of death taking place above our heads. As Lassoon struggled mightily, the four Nagasas pulled the chains about her neck taut as they each sought to pull away in four perpendicular directions. It was obvious the Nartesians intended to choke Lassoon to death despite her armor. "Wait!" Liaza called out. The Nagasas strangling Lassoon let up a bit on the tightness of her chains. This despicable Nagaza is missing her center chest scale. Yet another sign of her renegade, delusional intent. Do not strangle her. Bring her down to the arena. Secure her with chains, spreading her precious wings so she has no protection for her exposed chest. Let her die like the others by the blast of fire. From my loyal Nagasas burning through her foolishly unprotected chest until the flames incinerate her traitorous heart. As the Queen ordered, so it was done. Hannah and I were moved to separate posts and Lassoon was positioned to the side of Hannah, who was on my left and in the very center of the arena. Dinarts was still chained directly behind Hannah. Lassoon's wings were spread out wide. One of the other Nagazi used its armor-piercing talon to cut a hole in the thin, translucent part of her wings just below the first joint from the wing tip. A strong chain was run through the hole and around the wing bone, then affixed with some type of lock. Her feet were not chained as there was hardly any movement she could make with her wings, immobilized as they were. Queen Liaza mounted a small platform that had been moved to the edge of her box overlooking the arena, which gave her the closest possible view of our fates. As she stood up on the pedestal, a large number of Nagasas descended from above and alighted on the top of the wooden wall around the floor of the arena. Once again in an overly loud voice Liaza made an announcement. "Citizens of Nartis City. You see 21 Nagaza ringing the entire perimeter of the arena. 21 more wait to immediately take their place once they have expended their fire, and another 21 await their turn as the third wave of executioners. All four of the condemned shall be roasted together. But of course how long each will last before becoming burning torches of flesh and giving up their last breath is the question of wagering importance. Place your bets and enjoy the spectacle. I personally am betting that the girl will scream the loudest." Liaza looked directly at Hannah. "Do not disappoint me. Any further slime woman? Be sure to scream very loud." She spat with vindictive malice, bursting into an insane cackle of laughter. The Nagasas began to inhale and exhale as they built up their internal fires in preparation for our roasting. I called out telepathically to my fellow condemned prisoners. "Can you all hear me in your minds?" Yes, everyone affirmed. By every means of our own our situation seems hopeless. We still live, Dinarts reminded me. But to no avail, I countered. We are completely immobilized and have no means to either attack our adversaries or defend ourselves from their attacks. We must seek the help of a greater power than our own. I hope you are not referring to your mythical gods, Dinarts said with sadness tinging his voice in my head. I do not wish our last moments to be in disagreement over your primitive beliefs. I hung my head in disappointment that he would not even consider what would seem to be the only option left to us. He sensed my letdown and tried awkwardly to patch the rift. Do as you wish. Perhaps I will follow suit and invoke the rocks on the ground to fly up and knock the queen in the head. Inconveniently, the rocks have never heeded my wishes in the past, so I cannot put much faith they will in the present. But you go ahead and beseech the gods of your world, and perhaps I will talk to the rocks of mine and something good may yet come of it. I am sure it will not make anything worse for us, he said, trying to cheer me up. I will pray with you, Lazarus, Hannah assured me. What about you, Lasun, my wife asked. Will you let us include you in a prayer to Source for our salvation? I do not understand your meaning or intent, Hannah, she responded with some confusion. Like Dinarts, I cannot see what can be accomplished by beseeching nothingness. If it makes you feel better, you may include me. But in truth, after having been forced to kill my own children and being unable to protect you, I no longer wish to live, and death is welcomed. No. Do not think like that. Hannah pleaded. It is not what I think. It is how I feel, Lasun elaborated sadly. Before anyone could say anything more, or I had a chance to say the prayer I desperately wanted to say, from every point around the circular arena, the Nagasas began to blow their deadly streams of fire at us. Though they had been cautioned by Liaza to roast us slowly, it immediately felt like we were inside an unbearably hot oven. For at least a minute or more we all endured in silence, much to the disappointment of the Nartesians, I'm sure. Our protective skins were thankfully protecting Hannah and I so far. But towards the end of that short time I heard a whooshing sound behind me and knew that Dinart's feathers had succumbed to the unrelenting fire and burst into flames. If I had been wearing clothes, they would have been burning off my body as surely as the feathers on poor Dinart's were being incinerated. Scream! Liaza insisted with her overly loud voice at us. Scream lest I lose a wager. But rather than have cause to scream from the burning pain, we were given a momentary reprieve when the Nagasas all ran out of fire. It was only enough for a few quick breaths of relatively cooler air and for Dinarts to tamp out his burning feathers with his denuded wings. The first group of 21 fire-expended Nagasas opened their beautiful wings and took off in groups of 2 and 3 and were quickly replaced by the second wave of 21 that descended down from above and took their place perching on the arena wall. Get down into the arena, Liaza ordered. Get close enough that your fire is sufficiently hot to make them scream in despair. I really must hear them scream to have satisfaction, she prattled. The Nagasas obeyed and all hopped down to the arena floor, putting them less than 10 paces away from us at most. This time, despite my shield skin, I felt the searing pain of the relentless fire as the Nagasas breathed out their flaming orange streams of death. My body wasn't burning, but I was hurting, a lot. I needed to take big gulps of life-giving air, but I could not do it, lest I breathe in the superheated air and torch my vulnerable lungs. Once again I heard Dinart's remaining feathers burst into flames behind me. And far to my left I heard Lasun finally utter a heart-rending sound of agony. as her unprotected chest was penetrated by the focused fire from the other Nagasas. Then I heard the greatest anguish to my heart. My precious Hannah called out to me in telepathic torment. Lazarus! I cannot breathe. The air is too hot. Lee! She cried aloud. She thrashed about wildly and screamed aloud in drawn-out anguish, I am burning inside. As terrible as the fire felt in my lungs burned, the pain I felt in my heart to hear my beloved screaming in agony within sight of me, and to be completely powerless to help her or comfort her, this was a far greater pain than any my body endured. Just when I thought it was the end, when we would all surely perish, the second group of Nagasas ran out of fire. Once again we were granted a blessed reprieve of about a minute as the second group flew away and the third wave of Nagasa executioners descended to take their place. Before the Nagasas could begin their final deadly task, Liaza told them to hold. She left her box and entered the arena from the hidden door along the perimeter wall. As I was nearest, she walked over and stood right in front of me, so close to my face I could feel her fetid breath on my skin as she spoke. Your protective shielding is impressive. I would have expected your skin to be blistered and melting off of your body by now. She reached up and ran her hand over the top of my head. I see your shield does not protect the top of your head very well as all your hair has burned off. What? I didn't want to believe it. But I could feel Liaza rubbing my bald pate with her hand. I looked over at Hannah. She was slumped in her chains, barely standing up. And she too was completely bald. I knew then that it was true and we had already both lost our hair to the fire. Liaza walked behind me. I looked over my shoulder and saw her standing just out of reach of Dinart's. I also could not help but notice that he no longer had a single feather anywhere on his body. They had all been incinerated. Nagasas, hear me. Do not burn this bird to a crisp. Roast him slowly and tenderly so we can enjoy his carcass for a feast after the execution. She then walked over and stood in front of Hannah. My poor little pet. You could have had such a good life. You have no one to blame except yourself for your misery. Liaza reached up and cupped Hannah's chin in her hand. You could have been the pampered slave of the most powerful being in the world. In your last moments of life I hope you grieve over the needless stupidity of your loss. Liaza tried to give Hannah a quick kiss in parting on the lips. But as their lips touched she suddenly drew back with an exclamation of pain. Despite our dire situation I had to crack a smile as I realized Hannah had bitten her on her lip when the queen tried to kiss her. Liaza swung her arm back and hit Hannah with a vicious open-handed slap on the side of her face. You little piece of dirt! That will be the last rebellious act of your pitifully worthless life. The queen strode away fuming in anger from Hannah and went over to Lasun. Of the four of us she still seemed the least affected by the fiery assault we had been enduring. There is something very peculiar about you, Nagaza. I cannot place exactly what it is. Who is your master or mistress? Lasun did not respond to the queen's query. Liaza looked up and around at the Nartesians in the arena seating. Who is the master or mistress of this rebellious Nagaza? A man with curly blonde hair quickly stood up 5 rows up and off to the right. I claim that ungrateful, disobedient brute, the man exclaimed in disgust. Come here, the queen demanded. The man with the curly hair quickly made his way down to the arena floor. He approached the queen timidly with obvious trepidation. "How is it that this creature tried to defend the interlopers? You must have had something to do with it." The man was now obviously fearful because he was literally trembling. "I assure you, Liaza, I had nothing to do with this creature's behavior. She has always been obedient to my every command." The queen's face lit up with a wicked smile. "So you admit that you prompted her to protect these miscreants?" "No, no, no, my highness. I was abhorred when I saw her drop from the sky and envelope the condemned with her protective wings." "Then why did you allow her to do it?" Liaza asked menacingly. "I did not," the trembling man said, protesting his innocence. "I was commanding her to depart the arena from the first moment she entered it, but she would not obey my commands." The queen called out in her loud voice. "This fool claims his Nagaza did not obey his commands, even while he was sitting right here in the arena looking at her." The entire crowd laughed uproariously at the queen's comment. Liaza spoke again to the man in a very threatening tone. "You realize, of course, that what you are saying is impossible." The poor man was shaking like a leaf in the wind now as he silently nodded his head in agreement. "I know now that I have been punishing the Nagaza, when it is really you who should be punished, isn't it?" The man vigorously shook his head, denying the queen's assumption. Liaza faced him with her hands on her hips and spat her words at him with vehemence. "I should tear your lying heart out of your body and feed it to the river rats, but that would end our fun with your Nagaza too soon. Considering your own lies and treachery, you will need to share her fate. Go stand in front of her and remain there until you are consumed by the fire. And make sure your Nagaza stays there as well." The doomed fellow was shaking so violently he could hardly stand. In fact, he fell down to his knees and began feverishly kissing Liaza's sandal-clad feet. "Please, my most powerful, omnipotent queen, please," he pleaded. "It is not my fault. Perhaps I am just not well. I beg you to have mercy. Please send me to a physician, not to the fire." While he was pleading for his life, the crowd was taking up a chant, yelling in a frenzy of excitement. "To the fire! To the fire!" I had always thought the Romans were a bloodthirsty lot with their frequent scourgings and crucifixions, often for petty crimes and offences, but they seemed almost forbearing in comparison to the maniacal Nartesians and their insane queen. To my astonishment, the curly-haired man went docilely to his fate and stood in front of Lasun to await his death by fire, as he had been commanded by the queen. Liaza returned to her box, raised one of her arms high and called out to the Nagasas, "Hear me, all you creatures of fire and sky! I have honored you by letting you be the executioners for the worthless rabble below. When my arm falls, you are to begin your final fires of death and destruction upon the unworthy miscreants and continue until they are ash. Save the bird. Create a dome of flames which consumes all within. However, those of you on the backside, spare the bird your hottest fires. Remember, he is to be part of our feast during the festivities after the execution." She was quiet for a moment, still holding her hand high while dozens of Nagasas fluttered above awaiting her signal. Without warning, her hand fell in a quick descent. I took a big gulp of fresh air, realizing it would be my last before the fiery onslaught. Then it began, scalding hot flames from every direction. The Nagasas literally fulfilled Liaza's instructions, as there was soon nothing but a wall of fire everywhere I looked, in front of us, on both sides of us, completely enveloping the sky above us, and even flowing like a flaming carpet along the ground of the arena and lapping at our feet. It would be more dramatic if I could tell you how we all were in tortured torment by the final fiery assault, but such was not the case. Something far more wonderful and unforgettable occurred that made us oblivious to the heat and the pain. As the blast of incandescence enveloped us and the fiery tongues of flame licked at and encircled our bodies, there was suddenly a profound connection between all of us who were condemned to die. It was far more than a mental, telepathic connection. For that moment in time all of us, me, Hannah, Dinarts, Lassoon and even the Nartesian who was named Froiglo, were connected as one. We were not 5 individuals, but one magnificent common mind and heart. There were no secret thoughts, no hidden emotions or agendas. We were one. And in that oneness there was a peace and serenity, a disconnect from the horror of our situation. It was as if we were not even there. Though I could hear Liaza screaming in excitement, and the roar of the crowd as they watched our demise, they seemed only like faint echoes in a distant canyon. In that moment of oneness, we discovered a shocking secret about Froiglo and Lassoon, one that at that juncture I had neither the time or mental capacity to understand. And then it was over, but not in the way any of us expected, least of all Liaza. Amidst the dome of fatal fire there was suddenly a brilliant white light that filled the space of our fiery furnace and rapidly expanded outward in a wave of thundering concussions. Unable to bear the intensity of the white luminescence, I closed my eyes for protection. The thunder that shook the very ground we stood upon like an earthquake, was followed by a deafening silence. The maniacal screams of Liaza were no more. The riotous cacophony of the crowd was replaced at first by silence, then by the faintest of disquieted murmurings. I took in a big gulp of fresh, beautiful, cool air, and opened my eyes to an unbelievable, wondrous sight. In front of me, hovering in the air about my height above the arena ground, and facing the box of Queen Liaza, was my sister Mary Magdelene. She had a scintillating, white, ethereal glow emanating from all parts of her body. Seeing that, I realized it really wasn't my sister Mary Magdelene at all, not anymore. In her majesty and the fullness of her power, I knew what the Nartesians were about to discover, that they were in the presence of the Angel of the Covenant. And to use a modern euphemism, I expected there was soon going to be hell to pay. Chapter 19. Angel of the Covenant. My first intentional gaze was over to my wife Hannah. I saw her chains and slave collar laying limp on the ground and realized mine were as well. We stepped away from the cluttered pile of enslaving links at our feet and rushed with big smiles of joy into each other's embrace. For a moment we just held each other very tightly as if we were trying to merge our bodies as one. To be embraced in the warmth of her love was a piece of heaven. Amidst what had been our hell, Hannah rubbed her hand over the top of my bald head. "I like you better with hair," she said with a mischievous smile. I rubbed my palm over the top of her equally bald pate. "You seem to be missing a few hairs yourself, my love," I noted with a wry smile. I held her gaze, so happy to be holding her and looking into her eyes once more. With the outside of my fingertips I softly caressed her cheek. I love you with or without your beautiful locks. But if I have a vote, I hope you will grow back your lovely tresses. Hannah nodded in agreement. That and finding some clothes to wear and holding our children once more in my arms, are absolute certainties. Oh, I don't know, I've kind of become accustomed to nakedness, I jest nonchalantly. Considering our nakedness, I looked down to once again admire my wife's perfect female form and was surprised to discover that her old, still beautiful, but less voluptuous body had returned. She looked down and noticed it too and seemed just a bit disappointed. We both turned questioningly towards Mary Magdalene to clarify our confusion, and that's when we saw Liaza. At least I assumed it was Liaza, as she was in the Queen's box seating and was wearing the Queen's headdress. But the body beneath it was not the epitome of womanly perfection I had grown accustomed to seeing. In her place was a very old and extremely shriveled woman whose withered teats hung down to her waist. A quick glance at the other Nartesians in the Queen's box and continuing up into the grandstands revealed that every single Nartesian had been transformed into an aged, withered old person, tottering around, humped over and enfeebled. Lassoon came over to us and put her face near ours. Warm air bathed us when she exhaled her breath. "What has happened?" Lassoon asked, perplexed. "Why are the Nartesians old? And where did all of the Nagasas go?" So much had happened so quickly it hadn't even yet registered in my awareness that all the Nagasas that had been hurling streams of deadly fire at us were gone. There was not a single one in the arena area other than Lassoon. Looking skyward, I counted 4 others. High up, but no more, anywhere. Denarts loomed over us. His body was denuded of feathers and scorched black and bleeding in many places. But his spirit was not broken. "You see," he asserted confidently. "As long as we still live, there is hope." He looked over at Mary Magdalene and our eyes all followed his gaze. It would seem that the glowing creature's sudden appearance has caused drastic, inexplicable changes to everything, by a power I cannot even fathom. But what is it? It just hovers in place without feet on the ground or wings to keep it aloft. "That," I said with both humility and pride, "is a who. Once upon a time that seems far longer ago than it was, she was my sister Mary Magdalene. Now she is an angel of source, one known for her temper. If the Nartesians are not yet afraid, they probably should begin being so." Denarts cocked his monstrous, featherless head as he tried to fathom the meaning of my words. "Source? The mythical god you called upon? You best reconsider that opinion," I advised Denarts. "As you can see, Mary Magdalene, who is an emissary of Source, is not a figment of my imagination. Nor is our salvation from death, for which we can be thankful for her intervention. And as you have observed, she wields an unfathomable power beyond mere mortals like you and me." Neither Denarts or Lassoon seemed inclined to accept my explanation for the recent fortuitous turn of events. But from the blank looks on their faces they couldn't think of an alternative either. The 4 of us approached Mary Magdalene from behind. We didn't have far to go and she sensed our presence the moment we began to move toward her. "Hello Lazarus and Hannah," she spoke without turning back to look at us. 'Tis amazing the quandaries you can get yourselves into in such a short time on a simple observation trip. Yes, I agreed facetiously. We have never ceased to amaze ourselves at our propensity for attracting challenges. And short seems to be a very relative term, Hannah added. To us it seems as if we have been here a fatiguing amount of time. But we are so happy to see you, Mary Magdalene. How are our children? They are fine, Mary Magdalene assured her. Your time away has just seemed like another normal day to them. Just a day? I asked incredulous. Yes, Lazarus, she confirmed. Just a day, actually even less than a day to their perception. Denarts stuck his bald head forward so he could look at Mary Magdalene from the front. Are you really Lazarus' sister? Yes, Mary Magdalene assured him. Have you been the cause of our freedom and the transformation of the Nartesians into doddering ancients, who now seem so dim-witted they just stay in their seats staring at us stupidly? Yes, again, to both, Mary Magdalene acknowledged. At least to some degree. I did not make the Nartesians look as they now do, I merely removed their facades so you now see them as they really are in appearance. I have also cast a temporary mind-numbing spell upon them so they will remain docile until I decide their fate. Their facade? Hannah asked with brimming curiosity. Mary Magdalene turned around so she could face all of us. Yes, their facade, Hannah. It may be difficult for you and Lazarus to fully grasp, but the Nartesians are masters of illusion. They are an Alamar race, the same as you, but they are the final small remnant of a very ancient people that once had cities far across the lands of this world. Their existence here predates the arrival of the very first Alamars on your earth by many tens of millennium. Over many generations they learned some of the secrets of longevity that stem from diet and behavior. Generations later, they mastered an enormous expansion of certain abilities. Together, this knowledge and these abilities have allowed their bodies to continue to live for thousands of years. Thousands. I stammered, astounded. That is older than Methuselah, who at 969 years was supposed to be the oldest man ever. Mary Magdalene smiled slightly as she replied. On your earth, he may have been among the oldest, but on this earth, these people would consider Methuselah not even middle-aged. All of us seemed too shocked to reply, so Mary Magdalene continued with her explanation. In the earlier generations, despite their best efforts to extend their lives, most of the Nartesians died before they reached 500 years. Centuries before they died they were already looking, gray-haired, wrinkled and decrepit in appearance as you see them look now. They had accomplished as much life extension as could be gained by eating the optimum foods, by drinking the life-enhancing teas and by keeping their bodies physically active. Some of the brightest of the oldest among them discovered additional hidden secrets of longevity beyond food, drink, and physical activity. Chief among these was the importance of daily sexual activity. This presented a large problem. Though it would serve the younger Nartesians well, it was a secret discovered by oldsters, who looked as old as they were. Even if they could muster the urge and capability themselves, no one would care to have sexual relations with their elderly form, not even their own husbands or wives. At first they tried to make themselves more physically attractive with makeup, cosmetics, and jewelry to appeal to younger generations, but it was understandably met with little success. One of the advantages of living even for hundreds of years is the vast amount of knowledge that is acquired and abilities that are mastered. A tremendous breakthrough was accomplished about 20,000 years ago. Some among the oldsters mastered the skill of living illusion. I am not referring to the simple illusions of magicians or temple priests, which make the viewer think they are seeing something that is really not there. The ancient Nartesians mastered celestial-level illusion, which transcends mirage and becomes real substance in their own bodies, and in the case of created creatures, also includes self-guided sentience and full physical function within themselves. Thus began a rapid, evolutionary expansion among a select few that mastered this rare skill. Those that succeeded, acquired the ability to live for over 1,000 years and some far beyond that. Using the power of their mind, they fashioned and formed a younger and completely beautiful image of themselves with a perfect and desirable male or female body that had tangible substance and form. Once created, the form was self-sustaining with minimal maintenance. They were also able to use the power of their minds to literally become the masters of their bodies. They still continued to eat the best foods and follow other foundational principles of health, but the strength of their minds allowed them to almost completely stop and even reverse the natural deterioration of their bodies with age. Because of this, even without the facade created with their mental illusions, a 200-year-old Nartesian still looked like they were just entering the youthful side of middle age. At first, this was only a handful of people. Most Nartesians failed to master the skill of complete illusion. Though the secrets of ultimate longevity soon became widely known, the results were still unattainable to them in their wrinkled old bodies. Ick! Hannah suddenly blurted out in disgust. Ick! 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 It is bad enough that in my idiot zombie state I kissed and had intimate relations with Liaza. She pointed up into the box at the Queen still sitting passively in her chair looking at us, seemingly without a care in the world. But now you are telling me that it is the lips of that wicked, shriveled prune up there that touched mine? And touched other parts of me. Yuck! She hissed through gritted teeth, squinting her eyes tightly closed as if trying to make the memories go away. Mary Magdalene nodded her head affirmatively. You will need to learn to cope with such atrocities and affronts to your customs and moral values if you are to succeed as Earth Guardians. I am sure Liaza will not be the only one you will encounter that will test your resolve and the foundation of your faith, morality, and goals. As you have learned in this short visit to just a single world, the creations of Source in the vast numberless worlds of existence, are immensely varied and radically different in every aspect, compared to the limited life and diversity you have known. On the world you call home. Lassoon, who had been listening silently, quietly interjected a question. What about me and my kind? Nagasas never stray far from the Nartesians. Those that have wandered or explored beyond the realm, never return. She looked skyward at the only 4 Nagasas besides her remaining. And now it seems my entire species except for me and 4 others have disappeared. Are you the cause of this? Lassoon took in a big breath of air. The kind of massive intake Nagasa take in as they stoke their internal furnace and prepare to breathe fire. She looked with anger upon Mary Magdalene. Did you kill my kindred? I was afraid of what might happen next. But Mary Magdelene must have put a little spell on Lassoon, because she smiled a gentle smile at her and you could see Lassoon visibly relax. Mary Magdelene came down to the ground and took a few steps over to Lassoon. She gently stroked her just above the top of her nose as Lassoon bent down her head. "You are very intelligent, Lassoon, and I think you already know the answer to your questions." "You know my name?" Lassoon asked with surprise. "Yes, and much more than your name. I know you are special and you have perceived that truth as well, haven't you?" Lassoon nodded her head in agreement. "Wild thoughts are in my head. They make no sense. But I know something is peculiar. I know that I am somehow different than most of my kindred." She hesitated a moment, contemplating putting her thoughts into words. "I sense that my kindred are destroyed, but not quite dead, is that right?" Mary Magdelene shook her head, affirming that the other Nagaza were not dead. "But they are not alive either, are they?" Lassoon asked forlornly. She was silent for a moment, then nuzzled the tip of her nose against Mary Magdalene's upraised palm. "First I lose my babies. Now I have lost all of my kind save 4 others. Life is not worth living," she spoke softly in our minds with sad dejection, resigned to a fate she obviously did not feel she could bear. She brought her large head down so she could look directly into Mary Magdalene's eyes. "You have done all of this, haven't you? The aging of the Nartesians, the destruction of the Nagaza. All of this to save Hannah and Lazarus? I am sure you had reasons you felt were just. And I am happy to see the Nartesians reduced to being powerless. But the loss of all my kind hurts me. It hurts me very deeply. What good is my freedom if it came at the cost of the loss of all of my kindred? Seeing all that you have wrought in an instant is inconceivable. But the evidence is undeniably before our eyes, making it as indisputable as it is incomprehensible. In acknowledgement of your power, most mighty friend of Hannah and Lazarus, I beseech you to please use it on me. I plead for you to end my life as you have my kindred. I have nothing left to live for. Wherever you sent my kindred, send me there too." Hannah hurried over to Lassoon and embraced her as much as her arms would allow, around Lassoon's long neck. "Please don't say you want to die, Lassoon. Stay with me. I will love you as much as I love my own children and my husband Lazarus." "You are sweet, Hannah," Lassoon said, nudging her face affectionately with the tip of her nose. "But even with your love and attention, I would die of loneliness without my own kind in a community to associate with regularly. My kind thrives on living with extended family all around, but languishes without it." She looked skyward at the 4 other Nagazas still circling high above, then looked at Mary Magdelene. "Do you know if any of the survivors above are male?" Mary Magdelene shook her head negatively. "Like you, they are all females. They are the other egg layers of your nesting cave on the mountain." Lassoon had a look of ultimate dejection writ upon her scaly face. "It is the final blow. 11 years to wait between fertility and young ones is a long time. But to know there will never again be little ones, never again the opportunity to be a mother." Mary Magdelene touched Lassoon gently on the side of her head. "Describe to me how you would have your world be, if you could have it exactly as you would want it to be." Lassoon let out a long sigh. "Your effort to cheer me up will not succeed. I still want to die, and now would be my chosen time. That is the world I would create, one where I am no longer in it to suffer. Soon, Mary Magdalene spoke gently. Don't let your grief overwhelm your perceptions. You know there is more here than it would seem. I trust you. I trust your experiences and your knowledge of the interrelations between species on this world. If you could make it better for you and your kin, better for Dinarts and his kin, better for the people of the river, and even better for the Nartesians, how would your world be? Reluctantly Lasun answered Mary Magdalene. Speaking of this only makes me sadder. It makes me feel my loss more deeply and expands my frustrations more greatly. Of what practical use is wishful contemplation of something that can never be? Lasun let out a whooshing breath of frustration as she looked at Mary Magdalene. If I answer your question, will you end my life afterward in return? Mary Magdalene nodded her head affirmatively. Yes, if that is what you wish after you hear my reply. Very well, Lasun exhaled with slow resignation. I would begin by having all of my Nagaza kindred alive and around me once more. I would have never done the foul, unforgivable deed of burning my own babies to death. I would see all the Nagasas free from the mental enslavement of the Nartesians. Of the Nartesians, I do not care what happens to them. Of Dinarts and his kin, I would see the Nagasas living in peace with them as long as they live in peace with us. Of all the rest of life upon my world, I do not know them well. Enough to say. Let them go their way in peace and we will go ours. She looked blankly at Mary Magdalene. Now may I die? You have not yet heard my reply. That was our bargain, Mary Magdalene asserted. I already know what you will say, Lasun assured her, so you have no need to speak it. My babies are dead and that cannot change. I don't know what you did to my kindred, but I realize that somehow their existence was tied to the youthful appearance of the Nartesians. That is why we were slaves, and that is why when you changed the Nartesians into old people, the link to my kindred that sustained their existence was broken. For whatever reason they no longer could be here without the Nartesians also being here in the fullness of their form. Whether they have perished or simply vanished to another realm of existence I know not. If you can send me to them wherever they are, do it. Lasun placed one of her sharp talons against her tender exposed flesh where she was missing her large chest scale. If you cannot send me to them, then end my life, or else I will end it myself. You promised to wait until after my reply, Mary Magdalene pointed out. Get to it then, Lasun grumbled as she dropped her sharp-pointed talon away from her chest with some exasperation. Perhaps I should give you the best news first, Mary Magdalene began. Your babies live, Lasun. They never perished. In fact, they have already hatched because of their trauma and even now await the return of their mother to guide them into life. This was astounding news. I expected Lasun to brighten like the noonday sun with joy. But she looked up expressing only the faintest interest. I assure you it is not possible. Lasun said with great sadness. If her kind could shed tears I was sure she would be crying then. I blasted them with my full fire in a confined space. Not even an adult Nagaza would have been able to survive that concentration of heat. Nor can I give any credence to you, a peculiar being that just appeared moments ago, would be able to know the details of an event that occurred before your arrival, at which you were not present. Mary Magdalene smiled. I'd seen that coy smile before when she realized she was about to reveal something that would greatly surprise others listening. And so it was on this day. I know you were hatched under the light of a full moon. I know that your mother was Rela Basque and her mother was Dilths. I know you have planned to escape the Nartesians or die trying by continuing out of the canyon until you are beyond their realm. And, I know the fate of your babies. Lassoon just stared at Mary Magdalene for a long, silent moment, impacted by her revelations. They live? With certainty they live? But how? Did you protect them? She asked with mounting excitement and joy. Hannah protected them, Mary Magdalene said, pointing at my wife. I wish it were so, Hannah replied wistfully, but I was a helpless, bound, prisoner. I screamed out, trying to awaken Lassoon from the spell that was upon her mind, but it was to no avail. I failed. Mary Magdalene had a big smile on her face now. You did not fail, Hannah. In that moment of heart-rending anguish your celestial gifts came forth in great power. It has always been in you and still has far to go to mature, but in that moment of greatest need, when there was no other way for you to change the situation, your greater gifts of light came forth to protect Lassoon's eggs when you screamed out no. 3 times. 3 is the number of the source. It is a magical number for the manifestation of the power of light. But how did screaming no 3 times protect the eggs? It doesn't seem to connect, Hannah asked, confused. Mary Magdalene was only too happy to provide us all with the explanation. At that brief moment of greatest need and most dire of circumstances, all of the energy centers of your body were untied and rapidly expanding. The power of your heart center was the master of all. When you cried out no 3 times, you unleashed and called in the far greater powers of the source from beyond this world. That amplified your own abilities for a few seconds. But that is all the time that was necessary. Because you knew what you wanted to protect, you didn't need to know how to accomplish it. Your will to protect it was enough to make it so. No sooner had the last no left your lips than an impenetrable barrier of energy surrounded Lassoon's eggs. During the few moments of the barrier's existence, nothing short of the power of the source directly would have been able to penetrate it. I did not know I could do something like that, Hannah said, holding up her palms and looking at them in a daze of wonder. I was happy for Hannah, of course, but I had to suppress a little envy. It seemed that other than Jesus, it was almost exclusively the women in celestial light who easily gained all of the notable powers and abilities. And we really couldn't count Jesus, as he was already in source. I knew I could manifest amazing gifts as well. It just seemed that all of us men had to work so much harder at it. After she had a few minutes to consider all she had seen and heard, Lassoon began to give credence to Mary Magdalene's words. She looked at Mary Magdalene somewhat of a daze, as if still trying to take in all that she had learned. From her excited movements it was obvious Lassoon was anxious to depart and get back to her children. She bid us goodbye and prepared to take flight back to the nesting cave on the mountain. But first, she nudged Hannah gently with her nose. I will see you again, Hannah. Hannah reached up and touched Lasun on her cheek, but she didn't know how to answer. I hope it is so, Lasun, but my path in the future is unknown to me. I have committed to a lifetime of stewardship and service. I know not where it shall take me or if I will even be able to return to this world again. Lasun slumped her head a bit, obviously saddened by Hannah's reply. Hannah looked pretty dejected as well at the possibility that she would never again see her new friend. Mary Magdalene stepped toward them and put a hand on each of their faces. Ladies of light, before you become too sad, you should know that destiny will not let you part so easily. I assure you that you will see each other again. I'm sure you have many shared adventures still awaiting you. You have only just begun your journey together. Destiny? Hannah asked with some confusion. Mary Magdalene nodded. When the path you walk upon in life and the path another walks have a very high likelihood to intersect as you both strive to fulfill your individual goals and ambitions, destiny coalesces to make it so. As it is and will be with you and Lasun. The faces of both Hannah and Lasun brightened with Mary Magdalene's words. But I was not so thrilled. With Mary Magdalene's announcement of Hannah and Lasun's shared destiny, I found I was a little jealous that my wife was going to have a fire-breathing, nearly invulnerable monster for a friend. However, I convinced myself that I was actually simply upset upon the principle. I thought freedom of choice was a foundation of the light, I interjected. It sounds to me like this destiny is taking that away and substituting inevitability regardless of one's own preferences. Mary Magdalene looked at me, seeming to be a bit perturbed by my ignorance. Nothing is inevitable, Lazarus. Each of you creates your ultimate path by the choices that you make, both big and small. Destiny is merely the most likely manifestation of your hopes, dreams, and desires as they intersect with those of others on a grand scale in your life. Destiny can bring enemies together in a battle of good and evil, or allies together for the same confrontation. Through circuitous routes that would at first seem to have no connection, destiny can eventually unite the talents of multiple individuals to create a magnificence together that would have been impossible for any of them alone. At any point you can walk away. You can say, I do not want this, and try to choose a different course. It is possible, but not easy. The pull of destiny is like a lodestone to iron. The closer you get to it, the more irresistible it becomes. Lasun spread her wings and flapped them a few times in preparation for her flight. It created quite a breeze. Then I trust we shall meet again, Hannah, she told my wife with confidence. It is something I look forward to. I will need a distraction to keep me out of the depths of despair at the loss of most of my kindred. Before she could take off, Mary Magdalene held up her hand and asked her to wait. Your kindred can return, Lasun, and I will leave it to you to decide if it is to be so. That was a shocking statement that quickly made Lasun fold her wings back close to her body and rivet her attention on Mary Magdalene. How? Was all she asked. Mary Magdalene smiled and began to elaborate. As you have perceived, Lasun, your kindred are joined to the Nartesians, but it is not a union. The Nagasas are literally creations of the Nartesians. And with the exception of your eggs and those of the other females of the mountain cave, all the young born to Nagasas were no more truly alive than the Nagasas themselves. They were merely new constructs of the Nartesians. The Nartesians could create and animate your kind, could make them self-willed and self-reliant. But they could not give them the spark of true life that would allow the Nagasas to freely reproduce. For that is only within the realm of Source. Lassoon seemed confused. But my babies, I thought they were real. Mary Magdalene held up her hand. Be at peace, Lassoon. Wait a moment longer and I will explain how your children are a very real exception. Lassoon nodded her head and Mary Magdalene continued with her broader explanation of the events. When I arrived I put a stupefying spell upon every single Nartesian. It temporarily created a mindless population. Without the great power of their minds, they no longer had the mental power required to maintain the substantive illusions of their bodies of perfection. They degenerated into their true form, the withered, decrepit, old ones you still see sitting placidly in the arena. When their minds were taken away, so too was their ability to maintain the facade of reality that allowed your kindred, the Nagasas, to have self-directed, self-aware existence and what appeared to every sense of an observer's perception, to be physical substance. I did nothing directly to the Nagasas. They simply ceased to exist when their creators no longer were capable of maintaining the mental power to sustain the illusion. Denarts let out a loud squawk of disbelief. How could it be possible that illusions, mirages, pretend creatures, could shoot real, blazing hot fire that has killed many of my kind? There are many levels and layers to illusion, Mary Magdalene began answering Denarts. Those that you speak of, mirages and pretend creatures, are the simplest forms. They have no substance and can do no harm if you know them for what they are. But the creations of the Nartesians are an order of magnitude thousands of times greater than simple illusions. They draw upon the essence of the air, the earth, the water, herbs, grasses, and woods, to morph their own bodies into perfection and create creatures, buildings, objects, and even delicious food items that are perceived as real in every sense, from touch to taste to satiated satisfaction. But it is the stupendous power of their minds that holds all of their illusions together. To your perception and all other beings that interact with them, the bodies of the Nagasas are as solid and self-functioning as the bodies of any other creature birthed in normal ways. The fire they breath burns because, like the Nagasas themselves, the fire coalesces real and tangible elements from the surrounding environment to manifest and project true substance. Once the Nagasas were projected and animated by the Nartesians, they lived as conscious, fully alive creatures capable of independent emotions, thoughts, and actions. It was an admirably complex and monumental achievement to create a creature as magnificent as a Nagasa. Each Nagasa that was birthed into life was the culmination of long, dedicated efforts by one or more Nartesians. But until the advent of Lassoon and her 4 friends, the births were ultimately nothing more than pretend life. As they grew into adults and later mated, it was not from the union of 2 Nagasas that eggs were laid and babies born, though that was their perception, but from the mind of the Nartesians. So challenging was the task to maintain the mental link required to allow the Nagasas to continue to exist that even the queen, the most powerful Nartesian of all, was incapable of creating and maintaining a link to more than a few Nagasas at a time. She could command many and they obeyed her out of habit. But she could compel only those few she was powerfully connected to because she had personally fashioned them from the essence of the elements and animated them by the power of her mind. The link to the minds of an artisan became the single requirement to the continued existence of the Nagasas and the seed of their destruction. Though Nagasas were self-willed most of the time, they still needed to retain an energy bond to the mind of the artisan that created them. They continued to exist only because of that sometimes tenuous mental link. When the link was broken, as it was when I arrived, or when a Nagasa wandered out of the realm and beyond the mental connection of the artisan, they ceased to exist. They dissolved into the essence of the elements from which they were created. It is by that same link, from the mind of the artisan creator to the mind of their Nagasa, that the Nagasas were compelled to obey any dictate of their creator or otherwise powerful artisan such as the queen. Mary Magdalene looked up at Lassoon. Even a command to kill their own children was one they could not deny. It is by these same mental techniques of coalescing real matter and manifesting true substance that Hannah's body was transformed into perfection in a matter of hours by the artisan women. The queen's mental link to Hannah maintained the substance illusion, allowing it to remain coalesced. Without that mental connection, her body reverted to its normal appearance, just as the Nagasas vanished into oblivion once the minds of the artisans connected to them were dulled. I was incredulous at Mary Magdalene's explanation of the abilities of the artisans. They sound as powerful as the source. Like the source, they are able to create life as they will it to be so. Mary Magdalene wagged her finger at me. No, no, Lazarus. They are far from the boundless abilities of the source. Compared to you they may be godlike, but compared to the source they are merely children that have advanced further than most. Consider that I am only a humble servant of the source. They have given me but a tiny portion of their power, enabling me to fulfill my stewardship as the angel of the covenant. Yet even that small endowment easily subdued the entire race of artisans, took away their veneer and neutralized their abilities. Truly, Lazarus, if you are going to be a successful Earth Guardian, you need to gain some perspective. Mary Magdalene turned back to Lassoon. If I remove the spell I have placed upon the artisans, their minds will once again be free to create the Nagasas. As they are previously manifested creatures, their template is already formed. Restoring the Nagasas to the fullness of their glory should happen fairly quickly, if the artisans agree to do it. However, removing the spell will also restore the artisans to their perfected illusion state with the full powers of their minds available for mischief. That will likely occur, as I doubt they will come back in a very good mood. They may not be amenable to bringing back the Nagasas as anything more than the weapons and entertainment that they had used them for previously. Lassoon was taken aback by Mary Magdalene's answer. I think she was expecting something different. But you are all-powerful, Lassoon objected. You turned the entire race of artisans into old ones in an instant. Surely you can command them to do anything you wish and they will have no choice but to obey. The corner of Mary Magdalene's lips turned up in a slight smile as she contemplated her answer to Lassoon. What I am capable of doing is often constrained by what I should not do. One of the foundations of everything I live for is that each sentient being must be given the opportunity to freely make their own choices in life, for the better or the worse, without dictatorial decrees of compulsion by anyone, especially not by someone more powerful. Those that are compelled become slothful. The spark of enthusiasm dies and they cease to grow and expand their potential. One of the primary reasons any of us experience life in a physical body is to enable us to grow and expand our boundaries and possibilities in ways that are unique to a physical existence. That opportunity must not be abridged or taken away, even from the Nartesians. I had been keeping quiet for a while, not desiring to appear as ignorant as I was. But unbelievably nobody had yet asked a question that seemed to me should have been at the top of the list of inquiries of Mary Magdalene. Finally, her reply to Lasson provided me with an opening. I could contain myself no longer and blurted it out. Speaking of physical bodies, if the Nagasas are all illusions connected to the Nartesians, why is Lasson still here? Why did she, or the other four circling up in the sky, not disappear when all the others did? Mary Magdalene smiled a big smile and happiness radiated from her face. Lasson and the other four expanded their boundaries. The Nartesians that projected them as illusions were among the most highly skilled. Their attention to detail and nuances was unsurpassed. At some point Lasson and her friends made a leap from the substance of illusion to life untethered to the Nartesian that created them. They had every evidence, from their appearance to their thoughts and feelings, that they were real. There was not even an iota of doubt within them. Over time their minds and emotions expanded so greatly that an illusion, even one as masterful as the Nartesians created, could no longer contain them. The spark of life that comes from Source permeates all of creation, every world, every space. It is always present, ready to ignite true life whenever it is ready to burst forth. Thus it was with Lasson and her four kindred. Mary Magdalene's explanation did not elicit much response from either me or Hannah. Between her exploits and those of Jesus, we had grown accustomed to miracles and unexpected outcomes. On the other hand, Dinarts and Lasson were both speechless. They just stared with wide eyes at Mary Magdalene, unable to grasp the enormity of what she explained. After a few moments of awkward silence, Dinarts put the matter to rest. I suppose all life has to begin somewhere. I accept that Lasson is a real monster. As I walk home during the next long days, featherless and without flight because the imaginary fire from the illusionary monsters burned them all off, I will contemplate greatly how to explain all of that to my kindred. Despite the seriousness of our situation, Dinart's dry humor brought a smile to everyone's lips. I am glad I am real, Lasson affirmed. It gives me hope that more of my kind will make the transition completely into life, but for that to happen they must first be restored to the fullness of their illusionary glory. Lasson looked intently at Mary Magdalene. If it will bring back the Nagasas, release the Nartesians from your enchantment. If they are anything less than agreeable, they will discover how frail their beautiful bodies really are when they can no longer control the mind of this former slave. As you wish, Mary Magdalene nodded in agreement at Lasson's desire. She turned and faced the Queen's box and the majority of the Nartesians still sitting placidly in the arena. She raised and crossed her arms in front of her and uttered the words, releasing the Nartesians from their stupor and restoring them to their illusionary beauty as she drew her arms to her sides. Kadaz. Frodka. Habalaj. The transformation of the Nartesian from doddering old people to ravishing beauties and ridiculously muscular men was startling, dramatic and nearly instantaneous. And they must have been fully aware of everything that had been taking place while they had been subdued in old, mentally weak bodies, because the Queen was instantly angry. She looked at Mary Magdalene with eyes burning with hatred. Given her illusion abilities, I was expecting steam to start rising out of her ears any moment. You! Liaza screamed as she jabbed her index finger in the air at Mary Magdalene. I wasn't sure if she had returned with a defective limited vocabulary, or was just so upset she couldn't think of any other words at the moment. You dared to interfere with my mind, she yelled loudly, throwing her hands toward the ground, causing it to erupt in a little geyser of dirt. Liaza took a step forward and leaped over the rampart of the arena. She landed on her feet facing Mary Magdalene about 4 paces away. In the blink of an eye she materialized a large spear in her hand with a wicked-looking, 4-bladed barbed metal point. Without another word, Liaza stepped 1 foot forward and threw the spear with all of her might right toward Mary Magdalene. My sister just stood still, her hands clasped together and held low in front of her. She was as calm as a warm summer's morning, while I was in wide-eyed horror seeing the spear of doom streaking toward her heart. But before it found its mark it disintegrated into dust. This only seemed to further incense Liaza. She screamed in fury. "Palace guards to my side, war spears ready!" Immediately at least 24 burly warriors leapt over the rampart to join the Queen facing Mary Magdalene. Each was armed with an even larger, more menacing spear than Liaza's. The Queen ordered them to form a half-circle facing Mary Magdalene. She pointed at my sister. "We are faced with a foe whose powers of the mind are as great as ours, but she is one and we are many. One spear she can turn to dust before it pierces her heart. I'm certain she will not fare as well with many. Kill her! Now!" At her command all of the warriors launched their spears simultaneously. Mary Magdalene continued to stand in one place with her hands folded together down low. While the Queen had been ranting, Mary Magdalene even looked up at the sky and around the arena for a moment as if she was bored by the whole affair. Much to Liaza's angry surprise, the dozens of spears all flying together through the air toward Mary Magdalene met the same fate as the Queen's. Before they had traveled half the short distance they all became little glints of dirt and rained harmlessly to the ground. The Queen pointedly jabbed her finger in Mary Magdalene's direction. "You have talents, vile one, but they will not avail you much longer. Everyone has a weakness. You cannot be strong in all areas of the mind. I promise you I will find your weakness shortly. Enjoy your final breaths of life. There shall not be many more." Very athletically, Liaza took a running leap and in one bound was over the parapet and back in her royal box. She ordered the palace guards to also return to the arena. She spoke with loud vehemence to all the Nartesians in the arena, and I assumed telepathically as well to ensure they all heard her. "Citizens of Nartes City. The newly arrived clothed one in the arena is a grave threat to our way of life. She has powerful mental abilities. You have already seen what chaos she has wrought, how she upended your carefully groomed lives in an instant. From the very moment of her arrival she has attacked us and declared herself our enemy with no regard for our lives or way of life. We must kill her now before she wreaks more havoc. To ensure our power is greater than hers we must be united as one in our intent. Focus now on this despicable wench. Look upon her, standing idly in the arena, taunting us by her disdain, daring us to attack her. Let us show this misguided miscreant the power of the united mental capabilities of all Nartesians, a power against which nothing in the universe can stand. Liaza's voice rose to a crescendo as she screamed like a maniac. Everyone, remanifest your Nagasas. Command them to roast her. Make her die. Make it slow. Make it painful. Envelop her in a dome of fire from which there can be no escape. Let her and those she tries to protect, burn in the same fire that will not go out until they are all ashes. Mary Magdalene still seemed somewhat disinterested in Liaza's rant. But having had considerable more experience with the crazy queen, I was feeling quite a bit of insecurity and trepidation. Suddenly in an instant, all of the Nagasas popped back into existence. As they took in big breaths of air to charge up their internal furnaces, all of us huddled as close as we could behind Mary Magdalene. And then it began. It was far more intense than what we had previously experienced. There was so much fire coming from every conceivable direction that all we could see was an impenetrable wall of flame wherever we looked. It was impossible to see through the barrier of fire at any point. When the fire first began, I cringed, remembering our recent ordeal with the Nagasas. But I soon realized this time there was no pain, no heat, and no gasping to breathe through superheated air. Though we were completely enveloped in fire, it was as if we were merely outside on a pleasantly warm summer day. Mary Magdalene asked us to all face each other in a circle and just start having a normal conversation. The Nagasas will expend their fire after a short while, she noted. At this point the Nartesians cannot see us at all, just like we cannot see them through the walls of fire. They imagine we are being consumed by it. When the fires die down they will discover we are unharmed by all of their combined might and effort. And so unconcerned by their attempts to kill us, that we are engaging in casual conversation with one another. I'm hoping it will cause them to pause and reconsider their course of action. Perhaps, given the evidence of their inability to harm us and our total disregard for their efforts, the Nartesians and their queen will be open to reasonable discussions and courses of action that are more harmonious for all concerned. I think you are overly optimistic, I commented knowingly. The queen has been accustomed to getting whatever she wants, from whomever she desires, for a very long time. She is ruthless, conniving, and has no regard for anyone else unless they are obeying and pleasing her. I do not think she will give up her efforts toward our destruction, and particularly yours, so easily. Lest Mary Magdalene think the queen was her only challenge, I thought it best to add a bit more enlightenment to the situation. Most of the Nartesians seem to think along similar lines as Liaza, that everything else that lives in the world or is conjured by illusion, only exists to serve them and give them pleasure. You may thwart their efforts to destroy you, but I do not think you will make any headway changing their desire to do so. We shall see, Mary Magdalene replied calmly, we shall see. Denarts squawked, indicating his desire to be noticed by Mary Magdalene. Speaking of conjuring, your mental abilities are impressive. But your timing is very bad. You may have noticed I am completely denuded of feathers. A bird that cannot fly is not much of a bird. While I appreciate your arrival and the fortuitous turn of events, and marvel at your power to nullify the illusions of the Nartesians. I am left to wonder why you did not arrive just a few moments earlier, before all my feathers were burned off by the pretend fire of the imaginary Nagasas." Mary Magdalene smiled slightly at Denart's serious question wrapped in dry humor. "I was hoping all of you would work matters out on your own and not need my intervention. And I was busy. As of yet, I cannot be in two places at once. I watch over many others besides Lazarus and Hannah. Some of them were in more dire straits, requiring my more immediate attention." Considering all we had been through, that seemed hard to believe. "Seriously?" I exclaimed with more than a hint of disbelief in my voice. Some of the other guardians had greater challenges on their simple observation excursions than we have had. Before Mary Magdalene could answer, the walls of fire began to quickly diminish as the fires of the Nagasas were expended for the moment. As the Nartesians in the arena came back into view, Mary Magdalene quickly reiterated our instructions. Ignore the Nartesians. Continue to talk with one another as if there has been no fire or anything whatsoever to bother us. That should help many of them realize there is something here beyond their ken." She looked up a Lassoon. "I will be needing your fire in a few moments, Lassoon. Please be ready when I call upon you." Lassoon nodded her head slightly in assent. Mary Magdalene turned to face the Queen and the bulk of the Nartesians in the arena. I looked up for a moment and saw they were all staring at us in abject disbelief and utter silence. The reality of our unscathed survival against their combined might was so incomprehensible to them that it left them speechless. Mary Magdalene spoke directly to the Queen. "Liaza, and all the rest of you gathered here. I have not come to fight you or to compel you, as you have compelled others. I do hope my arrival and your inability to harm me in the least, has given you a new perspective on your reality and will warrant changes in your attitudes and behaviors. But that is for you to decide, not me. However, the killing must stop, and the torture and destruction of the Nagasas for your entertainment. You are such an advanced people. I know you are. Better than this cruelty you have exhibited." I looked up at the Queen and her face was contorted with rage. Mary Magdalene's words of peace and harmony seemed to be having the opposite effect on Liaza. "You dare to come here, an unknown stranger, and dictate to us. You flatter yourself if you think you have defeated us. We will not change our way of life or stop our attacks upon you until we find your weakness and end your life." To emphasize her point, the Queen manifested some kind of energy bola. It had several short ropes joined together at a central point in her hand. At the end of each rope was some type of scintillating, electric green energy sphere about the size of a fist. Liaza swirled this around her head a few times, then threw it at Mary Magdalene. The tendrils of ropes wrapped taut around her body like the many-armed tentacles of an octopus, and the energy spheres stuck to her body at several points and began to glow. The Queen stepped forward and stood triumphantly at the edge of the rampart with both hands on her hips, gloating at Mary Magdalene. "I see you have met your match with the balls of Kazot. This is my most special weapon, the one I save only for my most worthy and formidable foes. I am honoring you by using it for your death. You notice how the orbs glow? They are absorbing your essence. There is nothing you can do to stop it. Once the Kazot balls have attached to your body, they merge with it, they become part of it as they consume you. Your very life force is being sucked out of your body. It will not be as painful or slow as I would have liked, but in a few moments, all of your life force will be inside those orbs. After you are no more than a lifeless husk, I will eat the Kazote balls for my evening meal and gain your life force. All of your power will be mine. Oh, I cannot wait. Hurry up and die. Let your last thoughts be how ridiculous you were to think that an inferior being like you could defeat me. Mary Magdalene merely smiled back placidly at Liaza in return. Knowing her past overwhelming reaction to threats, I was expecting something monumental in scope. But apparently she was under some sort of constraint as the angel of the covenant and just stood there without reacting, calmly letting her essence be absorbed by the glowing Kazote balls. After a few minutes the glow from the Kazote balls became blindingly intense. Without warning the orbs suddenly released their attachment to Mary Magdalene and the constricting ropes rapidly unwound from her body. There was an audible group gasp from the onlooking Nartesians as they realized that she was not dead and was no longer bound within the grasp of the Kazote bola. Rather than fall to the ground after the bola was no longer on Mary Magdalene's body, it rose up in the air above her head and began swirling rapidly around. The balls were still glowing a brilliant green, but they became a blur of green light as they whirled through the air. A loud whistling sound also began to emanate from the twirling mass. Suddenly there was a blinding burst of green light as all of the bola balls exploded. Simultaneously with a deafening reverberating concussion of sound. As the sound quieted and the dust settled, Mary Magdalene still stood placidly where she had always been, completely unharmed and unscathed. She looked up at Liaza who was staring down at her with shocked disbelief. "I'm afraid your Kazote bola has become extinct," Mary Magdalene spoke calmly. She brushed the settled dust off each of her forearms with her opposite hand. "I must say, the unique energy was rather refreshing. But if you are done playing your games, I would like to have a serious discussion with you and the other Nartesians." Liaza's reaction to Mary Magdalene's more than generous entreaty was to throw a temper tantrum. She stomped rapidly up and down, screamed in frustration through gritted teeth and pounded her clenched fists deliriously up and down in the empty air. "You will die! You will die! I have decreed it!" Mary Magdalene held up her hand. "Stop your rantings! I would have hoped that by now your extreme intelligence would have perceived that a different reality has asserted itself from the one you are accustomed to. But I can see you will need a bit more evidence." Without turning to look back, Mary Magdalene motioned with her hand for Lasun to step forward. Lasun immediately complied. Even though the Nagaza was standing on the ground of the arena, her large size brought her head above Liaza who was still standing in her box above the arena rampart. Mary Magdalene reached out and put her hand on Lasun as she spoke to Liaza. "I am needed elsewhere and have no more time to dawdle with your obstinance and pettiness. It is not my place to judge or punish you or your people. But I strongly suggest you begin to treat all other creatures and sentient beings with respect, beginning with the Nagasas, lest the punishment you deserve for your wickedness comes to you before you have had time to repent and mend the errors of your ways." Despite everything she had witnessed with Mary Magdalene, Liaza remained defiant and undeterred. She laughed at Mary Magdalene. I reign supreme. I am the only judge and the sole executioner. Do not dictate to me. Liaza pointed at Lassoon while continuing to deride Mary Magdalene. Though you have admirable survival skills, you are foolishly ignorant if you think a Nagaza is any threat to me. As I'm sure you have ascertained, the Nagazas are constructs of our brilliant minds. They are merely a thought with form, but no more of a threat to those of us who are their creators than a thought without form. Mary Magdalene levitated up in the air until she was beside the formidable spiked head of Lassoon and above the head of Liaza still standing in the box slightly below, which forced Liaza to look up at Mary Magdalene. But Mary Magdalene did not look at Liaza. Instead she looked up into the arena and addressed all of the Nartesians. I have not come to hurt you, but to help you. You are a great people, who have built marvels and wonders from your cities to yourselves. There is so much good you could do in your world. Instead you selfishly sequester yourselves in a walled city and squander your wonderfully long lives on meaningless entertainment, addictive gambling, sex without love, and cruelty to lesser beings that robs you of the essence of your soul. Something you will sorely wish you still had when your long physical life finally comes to an end and you enter the reality of the eternal life that continues on. Fortuitously, you can still redeem yourselves. You can still become better than you have been and seek to use your great knowledge and abilities to benefit others instead of hurting them, to respect them instead of enslaving them. This will not be a sacrifice for you. It will enhance your lives, both now and in the eternity to come. And it all begins with the Nagazas. Many of them, like this one who is named Lassoon, have changed in a very important way you are unaware of. For a long time Lassoon and others have only obeyed your commands so you would not realize that they could disregard your dictates if they desired. Mary Magdalene's comment elicited a loud round of laughter from all the Nartesians. Queen Liaza was laughing the hardest. Or perhaps we just heard her the most because she was closest. In any case, it was an obnoxious disrespectful laugh. For such a powerful being you are very simple-minded, Liaza insulted Mary Magdalene. For our amusement, I will demonstrate to you the fallacy of your words. She snapped her fingers and yelled out loudly. Is the wretch that constructed this Nagaza still alive and in the arena? From somewhere in a row far away. Near the edge of the crowd of spectators a voice replied that he was still living. Liaza snapped at him. If you want that to continue to be the case for a while longer, get down here immediately. His obedience to the Queen's dictate was impressively rapid. Once he was standing trepidatiously beside her, Liaza pointed at Lassoon. Command your Nagaza to envelope that ignorant woman in a ball of fire. Instead of obeying the Queen, the poor man was looking down at his feet and fumbling for words. Well, you see, my Queen, it is as this woman has said. My Nagaza no longer obeys me. In fact, she just ignores me. Liaza pushed him out of the box with a violent shove. Obviously your own mental capacity has been affected by recent events. It has nothing to do with the Nagaza, but only with your own defective abilities. I really must be going, Mary Magdalene interjected, but I cannot leave while this situation is still unsettled. Perhaps a demonstration might persuade you to change your misguided ways. Mary Magdalene looked at Lassoon but spoke loud enough for many Nartesians to hear. If it pleases you, I would appreciate if you could give the queen a taste of the fiery fate she condemns so many others to. Don't kill her, but sufficient to make a point. Lassoon nodded her massive head and inhaled a big breath, stoking her fire. This made the queen burst out in another fit of maniacal laughter as she pointed at Lassoon and Mary Magdelene. You idiot! I retract my former statement attributing any intelligence to you. Nartesians are impervious to the fire of Nagasas. The beasts are merely constructs of our minds. We know them intimately for what they are, rendering them harmless to us. The queen stood right at the edge of the rampart with legs spread and a hand on each hip in a posture of supreme confidence. This will be fun. Excellent entertainment before we resume finding a way to kill you, she spat at Mary Magdelene. Do your worst, Nagaza, she challenged Lassoon. I will try not to laugh too hard. Obliging the queen, Lassoon breathed out a wide stream of fire for just a few seconds. The queen never had time to laugh again. When the flames subsided, she was revealed to everyone blackened, charred and with her luxurious hair still burning. Her ornate headdress had slipped down her forehead as her burned-off hair no longer supported it. The little bit of cloth she had been wearing had caught on fire and she was furiously patting out the flames. The many pieces of metal jewelry the queen was wearing, from necklaces and pendants to large scrolling armbands, had turned red-hot and were burning her flesh. It was actually smoking where metal met flesh. In seconds the pain became unbearable and Liaza ripped everything off her body as quickly as possible and patted the fire out on her head with her hands. In moments she stood naked before everyone, without a stitch of clothing or ornamentation. She still retained the illusion of her perfected female form, but the very real burning pains left her voluptuous body visibly blackened and charred with ugly red welts and blisters wherever hot metal had been in contact with her skin. Oh, how I love this, I heard Denart's squawk. What she has done to me has now been done to her. I love it. Sweet justice. Liaza was dumbfounded and almost speechless. Almost, but not quite. How can I be affected by the illusion fire of a Nagaza? Mary Magdelene descended down into Liaza's box and stood non-threateningly beside her. She spoke to her both audibly and telepathically so all Nartesians could hear her words. It was not an illusion fire. The fire that burned your body and could have taken your life if it had continued, was as real as the fire burning through a dry forest after a lightning storm. But how is that possible? Liaza mourned. The fire is real, because the Nagaza is real, Mary Magdelene explained at last. Into the form that you and your fellow Nartesians conceived in your minds, the limitless power of Source has breathed the spark of true life. Hereafter these Nagasas will live, reproduce, and die as intelligent, self-directed, sentient beings. For now, some are still the substance of illusion. And others, a number you will never know, are fully alive. You would be wise to not cross them or abuse them or their kind anymore. As you can see from this short demonstration, they would make very, very formidable adversaries, thanks to your excellent design. They have had a long relationship with you, and those that are still the substance of your mental abilities will continue to require your devotion if they are to exist. If Nartesians begin treating them with respect and not as slaves or even servants, I suspect a mutually beneficial relationship can emerge. I wish to speak, someone from the audience yelled. Looking up, I saw a young muscular man making his way down to the Queen's box. He arrived and introduced himself as Gaklon. "Stranger who turns our world upside down," he began. "There is a big problem with Nagasas having real life." Mary Magdalene nodded, indicating he should continue, which he did with worry in his voice. "As you have noted, they are fearsome monsters. We created them that way to be sentinels for our realm. Under our strict control they have been incapable of venturing beyond our realm without an artisan to accompany them, so they are not a danger to the other creatures of the world, which would pretty much be defenseless against their blasting fire and impenetrable armored skin. Our games, which you deride as cruel, are the way we control the population of the Nagasa. For every egg that is laid and baby hatched, an adult has to die. If they are allowed to exist as free, truly living beings, they will reproduce in unchecked numbers and will soon become the unchallenged masters, not just of the Nartesians, but of the entire world. You hope for reconciliation and harmony. You ask the Nartesians to maintain the illusion of the Nagasas who have not yet found life. Don't you see, you are asking us to sustain the existence of creatures we now realize will eventually become either our masters or our doom. We will not do it. Go back to wherever you came from and leave us alone." Gaklon turned his back on Mary Magdalene without waiting for her to respond and stormed back to his seat in anger. "What say you?" Mary Magdalene asked telepathically to Lassoon. "Can you reply to the Nartesians on behalf of the Nagasas?" Lassoon nodded her head in assent. She spoke loudly and confidently in all of our minds. "Nartesians! You are right to fear my kind. You know better than anyone else what we are capable of, and how just a few of us could make the tiny race of Nartesians extinct within days if we wished. I'll admit that the thought is tempting as repayment for the cruel misery and death you have inflicted upon us without end. But we are also wise. We appreciate the marvels that you made us to be and are grateful for your mental abilities that allow some of our number to continue to exist. Having been slaves, we do not desire that fate for anyone else, not even you Nartesians. It is reasonable to assume that given our life and our freedom, many of us will leave this area and venture to and settle in other parts of our world. It is also reasonable to assume that given our new status as potential foes that you very intelligent Nartesians will come up with ways to protect yourselves from us, both offensively and defensively. Yet, because we will be dispersed across the world and no longer confined to a small realm, we will not fear being wiped out by your machinations. The same tactic might be wise for you to adopt for similar security. Re-inhabit some of your long-abandoned cities in other lands. You have been a slowly dying race for thousands of years. It is not too late to reverse that trend. Ultimately, it is not our nature, as you well know as our creators, to be domineering or offensively aggressive. We will defend ourselves to the death if we are attacked or provoked, but if you respect us and leave us to develop our community and society as we wish, then we will certainly do the same for you. It will be hard for some of our kind to forgive or forget the many injustices and indignities you have wrought upon us, or the here trending separation of friends when you forced Nagasas to fight to the death in this arena. But I believe if you prove yourselves to be changed for the better, respectful and kind instead of cruel, then you will not likely find any of us as your enemies, and will more likely find some willing to be your friends." That was quite a speech, and it seemed to have an effect on the Nartesians, even the charred queen. They were much more subdued in their voices and objections, and seemed ready to listen more than dictate. Mary Magdalene rose up in the air once more so everyone could see her. "In the land that we come from there is an old saying you would do well to adopt if you would like to become a people with even greater possibilities than you already possess. It is said a bit differently by different cultures, but is a universally accepted truth however it is worded. This foundational truth is simply to treat others as you would desire to be treated by them. This simple but powerful truth can be further distilled down to a single word: respect. Respect the beliefs, culture, and habits that others choose for themselves, no matter how different they may be from the ones you choose for yourself. Do as you wish, as long as it harms no one. And if it does, then do it not. That is the essence of this golden guide for harmonious living. It is my parting thought and prayer for you." Mary Magdalene turned her back on the Nartesians. They seemed to have accepted the change in their lives and world. Even the burned queen sat back passively in her charred throne and just watched us non-threateningly. She seemed to still be in shock that she had actually been burned by an Agaza that would not obey commands and had shot out a real jet of fire upon her. Mary Magdalene looked at our beat-up, threadbare group. "Lazarus and Hannah, it is time to return home. You will need to travel to the portal. I will depart now in ways that only I can, and will leave some clothes for you just inside the gateway for you when you return." Hannah put her hand up to cover her mouth that opened in surprise. "My goodness, I have been naked in front of so many people for so long I entirely forgot that I even was." I looked at her desirable womanly form with admiration, even without the Nartesian enhancements, and was flooded with happiness that she was my wife. Not because of her sexuality, which had been all but forgotten when it was commonplace everywhere you looked in Nartis City, but because noticing it again reminded me of her intelligence, ingenuity, diplomacy, cheerful, positive personality, and the many other wonderful abilities and traits she possessed. I was a lucky man. I too had forgotten I was naked, I admitted. Though we are both now perfectly comfortable in such a state, even among crowds of strangers, I doubt we would be well received in our naked boldness among the people of Bethany, or even among our fellow guardians. I'm quite sure you are correct." Hannah agreed. "Yet, I am very grateful our personal horizons have expanded during our visit to this incredible world that is so different in a vast number of ways than our own." Mary Magdalene looked to Lasun. "Could you and some of the other living Nagasas allow Lazarus, Hannah, and even mighty Dinarts to ride upon you that they may return to the portal with haste and Dinarts to his demises? I know it is much to ask, especially for Dinarts, whose kind has been adversaries of yours. But without your assistance and lacking his ability to fly he may not ever make it back to his land alive. And Hannah and Lazarus are needed, even now, back on our world." Lasun swayed her long neck back and forth a few times as she nervously contemplated an answer. But it was needless worry on her part. Very quickly after Mary Magdalene's request we saw 3 Nagasas descending from high above. They landed in the arena and introduced themselves as Udlund, Keston, and Laloju. Lassoon seemed surprised at their arrival. But Keston explained. We overheard Mary Magdalene's request. This is a small service to help repay a great one that your friends have done for our kind. Mary Magdalene smiled in gratitude, then asked Udlund a surprising question. Did you bring the item I requested? Udlund nodded and reached back under her left wing and withdrew a large Nagaza scale. I found it upon the ground where you said it would be. It was the one Lassoon had carved out of her chest to give to Dinarts for a shield. She gave it to Mary Magdalene, who walked over and presented it to Dinarts. You don't want to return home without one of the objects of your amazingly dedicated quest. Dinarts took a step back from Mary Magdalene and squawked loudly in protest. I do not want it. I am ashamed I ever wanted it. Then you do not mind if I return it to Lassoon? Of course not, Dinarts affirmed. But sadly it will do her no good. She already told us she cannot reattach it and another will not grow back to take its place. I have injured her for life and I am truly sorry, he said, hanging his head down. You never know, Mary Magdalene gently teased. I've heard that miracles can occur with those who live their life in the light. She walked over to Lassoon and held up the scale. Good lady, I believe this belongs to you. Lassoon took the scale from Mary Magdalene. Thank you, kind one, but it is as Dinarts said. This scale is a part of me from the past that cannot be reunited with the present. You may take it back with you as a keepsake memory from our world if you like. Can I first see how it would appear on you if it were in its rightful place? Mary Magdalene asked innocently. Lassoon looked over at her Nagaza friends. I suppose she was trying to fathom the eccentric requests of the strange woman from another world. But given all that Mary Magdalene had done for her and her kind, she humored her and held the scale up to the empty place on her chest and inserted it tightly. This is where the scale belongs, Lassoon explained. She stood up just a little straighter and the scale fell out. She caught it in her right foreclaw as it tumbled through the air before it hit the ground. But as you can see, it is no longer welcome in its former home. I beg you to let me see it in its place one more time, Mary Magdalene entreated. Lassoon sighed and once more slowly put the scale in place on her chest and held it there with both of her claws so it would not fall out. Mary Magdalene came up to it and put both of her hands upon it. Perhaps you just need to move it into its perfect place, she said, pushing on the scale. The scale suddenly illuminated in a bright white flash of light. If you blinked your eyes, you would have missed it. Both Mary Magdalene and Lassoon took a step back from one another. Mary Magdalene had a very big smile on her face. Lassoon was feeling her scale with both of her claws. She lifted her head and shot a joyous stream of fire straight up into the air. My scale is back. It is a part of me again. She looked at Mary Magdalene. You are a miracle worker. Sometimes it has been known to happen, Mary Magdalene nodded in happy acknowledgement. Can you help Dinarts too? Lassoon asked quietly. Can you restore the fullness of his feathers so he can fly majestic and free again? I could, Mary Magdalene confirmed. No, you cannot. Dinarts objected loudly to everyone's surprise. Everyone looked at Dinarts in confusion at his unexpected outburst. He quickly explained, restoring my feathers would have been a good thing had the alternative been to make my way back home on foot through the jungles and lands of those who would love to see me dead. But my feathers will grow back before we have made another circuit around the sun, and someday soon I hope to return here and make them perfect by bathing in the spring of restoration, which was one of my original goals. However, returning home denuded as I am, is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity one cannot ignore. Denarts looked at Mary Magdalene and bowed his head slightly in acknowledgement of her abilities. Restore my wings. Feathers if you will, so I can stand on the unflapping inner wings of two Nagaza and add my lifting power to that of their active outer wings, allowing the three of us to fly as one. They have been our fiercest enemy. Can you imagine the spectacle I will make returning while standing on top of two Nagazas? It will be a sight never even imagined. The fact that I am charred, bloodied, and denuded of feathers will be meritorious, an indisputable sign that I have battled with the Nagazas and now triumphantly return home atop their backs. Every female that lives will want to mate with me. I will be in paradise. But that is not exactly how it happened, Hannah pointed out. Well, I will not say that is was, Denarts said in slightly miffed justification. And do not forget that I did battle with multiple Nagazas, expertly I might add. But they are my friends now. I did not conquer them. And I will explain that to my kin. I will do my part to make a reconciliation between our kind and their kind possible. That is good, Mary Magdalene agreed happily. Let us all now depart, each our way. At Mary Magdalene's urging, the four Nagazas squatted down as low as they could. Hannah climbed atop her bonded friend Lassoon. After seeking their permission, I scampered up to the neck of Lalojo, and Denarts gingerly stepped up onto the backs of Udlund and Keston and spread his legs very wide so he had one foot on the back of each Nagaza. All of the Nagazas lifted up into the air and hovered for a moment as we waved goodbye to Mary Magdalene standing on the ground below us. There were two nagging questions I needed to ask before we left her. What was happening when we returned the first time and found our home in Bethany and our fellow guardians to be askew as if only parts of them were there? Mary Magdalene smiled. I imagine that was somewhat disconcerting. So it was you? Hannah asked, just as little Liz surmised. Mary Magdalene shook her head. It was not me, Hannah. It was a shared hallucination between you and Lazarus. You never left this land. As you walked toward the portal, you passed through a patch of bright yellow flowers with blue centers. Lazarus picked a few and put them in your hair. I remember, Hannah said happily. They were very pretty flowers, and I was touched in my heart that Lazarus thought to adorn me with them. They also emitted a potent perfume of hallucination, Mary Magdalene explained. Just a few whiffs inhaled put both of you into a slumber and joined your minds in a shared hallucination. It did not end until little Lisk arrived and you walked away from the patch of flowers. Her kind are unaffected by the hallucinogenic effects of the flowers, and her piercing telepathic thoughts awakened you from your stupor. But little Lisk returned because she saw the red mat I brought back through the portal from Bethany, I protested. Mary Magdalene shook her head. No, little Lisk returned because she saw you were still there where she left you. She assumed you had either never departed or had darted into the portal and had inexplicably come right back out. The red rug was just part of your imagination, Lazarus. But I was coated with dust when Lazarus began shaking the rug inside the gateway, Hannah pointed out. Only in the recesses of your joint imaginations, Mary. Magdalene explained. But you would be well served to remember that flower, she added. You can concoct some potent potions with it that you will find useful in the future in many of your challenges as guardians. Well, hearing these revelations about the flowers of hallucination just made my final question yet to ask, all the more pertinent. You said some of the other guardians had even greater challenges than we have experienced. You were joking, right? Mary Magdalene shook her head in denial. You and Hannah had it easy on this world. Some of the others had it easier. But others much worse. I'm afraid the experiences of some, as mild as they were compared to what is yet to come, were still so traumatic that they will no longer be numbered among us. Return home, brother, and you can hear the details of the exploits of others, share your own and prepare for your next challenge. But along the way, remember to be thankful, even grateful, for the many friends you have made here. Others were not so fortunate. I shook my head doubtfully, still trying to grasp how anyone could have had more challenges than those we had endured, but Mary Magdalene confirmed it. It is true, Mary Magdalene replied with sincerity. As you have all learned, being guardians of the earth is not a gift, it is a task. You will need to earn your immortality, every day, in ways that will challenge you beyond your knowledge, abilities, courage, morals, beliefs, and faith. But that is a greater blessing than you can imagine, as you will discover.